My name is Morgan McKnight. I am the Executive Director of the Production Music Association. I've been with the PMA for almost 6 years. It's been, quite the ride and the best community that I've come across. So it's great to meet all of you. The PMA, for those of you that don't know what that is, we are a nonprofit trade association. We are focused very specifically on the production music community. Any issues, composer issues, publisher issues, everything from advocacy to education and to community, which is a big part of what we do. So, we really work on behalf of you all. And, again, it's a beautiful community, and I'm certainly proud to be a part of it. On that note, just again, knowing that I don't know a lot of you on the call here today. Some of you I do. I see some familiar names. We do have a composer membership option at the PMA. And if you find any value in this session today, I encourage you to look more into it. I am always happy to jump on a Zoom with all of you individually if you would like to answer any questions and really give you any information and help however I can. So I really encourage all of you to be a member of the PMA. Again, we have a composer option. It's $99 annually. And outside of things like this, we do, monthly networking events that are PMA only with our publishers, our board, and our composer members. We do, what else? We have listening sessions and digital type of demo derbies that, get your music in front of publishers and clients sometimes. So, various things that are really beneficial to the composer community. So we really recommend joining. Again, if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat when I'm done. You can feel free to reach out to me at any point. Okay, next, I want to thank all of our sponsors. Our PMA Academy sessions are sponsored all by AdRev, ASCAP, the NMPA, Exactuals, ProTunes, and TuneSet. Thank you all for your continued support. We appreciate you immensely. So one of the things that the PMA has done recently is started the PMA Composer Advisory Committee. So this group of panelists that will be speaking with you today is that committee. We've very intentionally and carefully selected each person on this committee because of their outreach in the community, their knowledge, their experience, and a variation of other things. It really is in all of our best interest to protect the rights of composers. So we're here to do that. I'm excited to introduce this committee to all of you formally and to explain a little bit more about what we have going on and what initiatives we're going to take on, over the next month or so. Okay, almost done. Two more things. Very briefly, I need to say that, again, this is an advisory committee that is going to be speaking with you today. This should by no means replace you reaching out to a lawyer or speaking to a lawyer on any contractual issues, questions about clauses, questions about user agreements, and things of that nature. It's coming from experience. It's coming from personal experience and insight from their own either creation or as composers and creatively in the industry and publishers in the industry. So again, this should not be taken as legal advice, we formally encourage you to always speak with a lawyer if you have questions about contracts and things like that. Last but not least, we definitely have publisher members in here. I see a few of you. This is a fully engaged conversation. And I know that, publishers sometimes handle this stuff differently. If you have anything to input on this or any wisdom on any topic as we're going along that's relevant, please raise your hand and feel free to contribute. We want it to be an open discussion. This is a community, right? We're all in this together. Let's work through the solutions and figure it out together and get to where we need to be. So publishers, especially, please feel free to chime in with, anything that's specific to your company or that you've experienced that might be helpful for the composers that are here with us today. Okay, that's it. I'm done. Thank you all for being here. I am going to now turn it over to our moderator and who is the chairman of the Composer Advisory Committee for us for the PMA. Tim, go ahead and take it away for us.
Hey everyone, good to see everyone here. And it's very exciting to be a part of this Composer Advisory Committee. So as Morgan had mentioned, my name's Tim. I am first and foremost a composer. I've been doing it for a while, but I also music supervise, and I also co-own and am the creative director of Move Music LLC, which is a production music library. And as Morgan had also mentioned, everyone that's been selected to be in this advisory committee is basically because of their experience and their backgrounds, and it's a great representation of our community. And between the collective group, I'd like to think that we have some good things that we can speak to on, composer to composer, as well as some of us also being publishers as well. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. So I wanted to introduce you to the rest of the Composer Advisory Committee. I'm going to start with Michèle Vice-Maslin. If you want to introduce yourself and tell everyone about your background a bit, and then we can go around the room a little bit if you want to introduce the next person, Michèle. But I'm grateful to be here, and I'm glad to see everyone out this morning.
It's terrific. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Morgan, and everyone on the panel. It's so exciting to be on the panel. I'm really excited to serve. I am Michèle Vice-Maslin, and I am a songwriter, composer, music producer among the 2% of music producers, professional music producers, who are women. Yay, thank you, yay. And so there are none of us. So I'm very proud of that and hope that there will be more soon. And basically, this is my 41st year as a professional in the music business. So I wear that as a big badge of honor because it's hard to survive in this business. And I'm so proud to still be here. I compose, write for movies, TV, games, videos, ads, and also for major label artists. I've had hit songs all over the world and over 5,000 music placements. So basically that's what I do, and my credits are online for all the individual stuff. So I'm just love to give back and love to serve at this point in life. It's very important. So next, I will give you, who's next to me in my view, Andrew Gross, to just say hello to you.
Thanks, Michèle. Hello, everyone. I'm Andrew Gross. Began my career as a film and TV composer, scoring films like Biodome, Tenacious D and the Pick of Destiny, King of Queens. I'm also a publisher, have my own catalog, Konsonant Music, and a distribution company that I'm a partner in called Bulletproof Bear. And more recently, I've been getting into some music supervision. The most recent show that was released on Netflix is called I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson, which I'm music supervisor for, and I am happy to be part of this group. I will pass it on to Angela.
Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Sheik. I am so excited to be a part of this Composer Advisory Committee. I'm normally, I live in LA, but I'm visiting my parents right now in Western New York, where the internet is sketch. So I'm hoping it holds out for us all here. I'm primarily an artist, but I'm also a producer and have some composer experience. And my background is music education. I'm a huge advocate for women who want to learn to produce and organizations that help that, such as Beats by Girls, Female Frequency, Women's Audio Mission. And more recently, I have, for the past 2 years, been the executive manager of the Guild of Music Supervisors. So I work closely with music supervisors. I get to hear their, how they get excited about new music and how they complain about people who don't have correct clearances. So happy to be here today. I'll pass it on to Dan.
Hi there. Also a great privilege to be part of this. I started as a composer around 2003 to 2004 after being in a band, and then I set up Gothic Storm Music, which is a movie trailer music company, in 2010, and then gradually just expanded and set up new labels that go into TV and advertising, and tried to keep composing, and I'm just kind of getting back into it more in the last couple of years. But I wrote a book called A Composer's Guide to Library Music. So, and off the back of that, set up a Facebook group that's quite popular. So I've got to know what composers are talking about, what they want to know. And, you know, I want to carry on doing my best to spread information and avoid misinformation. And so that's my motivation. So yeah, thanks for letting me be here. And over to Michael.
Yes, I'm next. I'm a composer and songwriter. I'm best known for work I've done for film and television. Actually, probably my best known composition is the Kit Kat Gimme a Break jingle, but that goes back a way. I've also produced and written songs for Lord, Roberta Flack, the Monkees, and some others. But I am here today in part because I am the curator for Empath, which is owned by Marette Serig, who's also on this Zoom call. And Empath is the only music library, production music library in the world to have achieved gender parity. And so something that we're very proud of. Back to Timothy.
All right. Yeah, I'm muted. Great. So let's get started. So today's topic is avoiding legal and reputation problems from sampled loops, beats, tracks, and hooks. So I'm going to throw out the first question. I think the important thing, especially since it was announced, I've noticed on Facebook, you know, there's some questions because most everything we use as composers can kind of comprise of samples other than, you know, any kind of live performances, right? So the first question I want to throw out to the advisory committee is, you know, before we get into the problems resulting from the use of, you know, samples, let's define what we are addressing. So what are we talking about when we say samples here?
And
oh, you're muted, Dan, I think.
sorry, yeah, am I there?
Yeah, you're there.
So I suppose technically a sample is just a recording of music that then gets used and incorporated into something else. And then really during the 80s and 90s, sampling usually meant taking something from an LP and then using that as a breakbeat or something. And then gradually these big sample libraries appeared with like giga samples and orchestral sample libraries. So, you know, it can just mean instrumental virtual instruments like orchestra, like, you know, everybody's Spitfire, East, West, all the big sample libraries. And then another kind of different type of sample library is the loops, there's like pre-composed loops, which is like the thing that we're really focusing on here, which is where you can license a short loop that might be, you know, a few bars long, that might have a hook, or it might be just percussion or a bass line and various things like that, which then can be, you know, you're getting a license and they're giving you a license to use it, but there are, as we're going to see, there's potential problems with that. In terms of other samples, there's vocal phrases you can get, and I mean everybody uses samples, you know, piano libraries, so everybody knows what the range are. But you know, the thing is, as we know, some of them are safe to use and some aren't. So that's what we're talking about.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it's just very important to understand that there are different sets of samples, like Dan was starting to talk about. There are the samples that you might listen to an old Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young record and copy off that actual record, a piece of music, and use it in your production. That's one thing about samples. And of course, those samples cannot be used under any circumstance unless they are licensed. But then a new can of worms has opened where there are so many places we can find samples. Like there are just people on their websites advertising. They have loops sometimes for lease, not even for sale, non-exclusively. And that means we are never the exclusive owner of those loops, samples, vocal packs, anything that we're working with. So that's what we're going to discuss today, are really those, because the others we can't use no matter what without a license. But this gray area of what is acceptable and what is licensable is what we're going to discuss, because it's very gray and needs to be handled with caution when we're making our productions.
And
So
if I can add to what Michèle was saying too, I think the scope of I want to narrow the scope of our conversation, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're really talking about the use in production music. And maybe we'll even talk about the difference between production music and say maybe commercial releases, because specifically with production music and you're a composer and you're expected to deliver stems of your piece to a catalog as part of your, say, work for hire agreement. And maybe those stems have a beat or a hook that you licensed, and you may be in violation of your agreement with that company you got it from if that beat or hook is alone in that stem. So I think I really want to really make sure we're really talking about use in production music and production music deliverables.
yes, and just to expand on production music, because there's many people who don't work for production music libraries, but they do sync. It's the same thing. So we're not only discussing if you work for a production music library and do, quote, production music, but any kind of sync licensing that you might be interested in doing, that you might be doing. So any music that's in media, right? That's what sync is. Songs licensed for visual media. So that, and compositions. So we want to just make sure everybody gets that.
Thank you for making that clarification.
Thank
Absolutely.
you, Andrew.
Yeah, and this to speak to what everyone is saying here, and to kind of piggyback on what Andrew had mentioned. So my company, one of the things that we offer besides the full version, we'll also offer alternate versions of tracks, but we also put up stems, right? And the stems, the intention for stems is if an editor wants to maybe elongate something, right? Or maybe you want to have build it a little bit of a different way, your track, to make it work against picture with the time constraints that they have, right? Then one thing that we've noticed, because we registered everything, is that we started getting uses on like single bass lines and things like that. Because sometimes you don't need the full production and you don't need the drums and the guitars and the keyboards underneath it, and you just want a walking bass line underneath and it works. So sometimes these things get picked up and licensed. So to Andrew's point, if you are using anything that is kind of hyper melodic or super distinguishable, it can be problematic if it is used. Does anyone else want to jump in with other
I
types of
actually wanted I've thought about this. Dan made a really wonderful chart. I think Dan and Angela worked together on this, made a really wonderful chart that sort of relative risks. And we had a lot of debate about what are the relative risks of things. But the bottom line, I think a really simple rule of thumb for those who are overwhelmed by this, which is almost everybody, is that if something is compositional in nature, like if it's a number of notes in a melody, or even if it's a certain very distinguishable rhythm that is a performance, that anything like that essentially is a hook, a foundation of a composition, but an important element to a composition, then that's something you really should steer away from. If you're just talking about a kick drum, a snare drum or something, now you don't want to sample it from a hit record, but I'm saying from a music library that you're using, whether you're, Cinesamples or Spitfire or whatever, all of that is fine. That's not what we're talking about. You're safe to go and use your string samples. But using something like, some of these libraries have vocal step outs where you'll have, some very distinguishable riff, sometimes with lyrics. Well, if you use it exactly like that and somebody else is using it exactly like that, actually, Dan had a great anecdote, which maybe you should tell rather than me, about what happened in a particular circumstance like that.
You're muted again, man.
You unmuted. Yeah. There you go.
There's a delay on this. Yeah, I mean, we had a very specific problem with one of our labels where there was an intro to one of our tracks had this like dance music intro, and we got like a whole bunch of emails from different people, including our sub-publisher in the US, saying there's a copyright infringement at the start of your track. Here's a link to the YouTube video by this artist where they're using it's their intro, and so we're removing your track from our catalog. And they were kind of upset with us because they thought we were, it was a copyright infringement. So I was just going, right, what the hell's gone on here? And when I dug into it, I found that this artist had released their track about 6 months after we'd released our track. So then it's like, what's this? They couldn't have, they sampled it from us. And then as we got deeper into it, it turned out that we were just both using a loop. When I say we, well, one of our writers. So, which I wasn't even aware that this was very widespread until I talked to them, and they were saying, "Oh yeah, we often do that." And I just thought, "Oh my God," because it's triggering tune recognition clashes everywhere. There's YouTube content ID systems. There's loads of other things like, I don't know what it is, like Sound Mouse and other things that will pick up on this little short snippet of music and then generate a ton of clashes. And then everybody's arguing with each other, accusing of each other of copyright infringement. And when it transpires that everybody's using some sample that's exactly the same as your track, then everyone's kind of disappointed. They all think, "Oh, right, so you didn't really write that. That's not original music. That's just something that you got from somewhere else that you're putting out." So it affects your reputation, and it's a big admin problem if you're having to, chase all this and work out what went wrong. And so, speaking from our point of view, we've introduced a clause into our writer contracts that tries to prevent overt uses of very identifiable hooks that have come from, from a kind of an online loop emporium.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story there, Dan. That's one thing to keep in mind too. It's not just publishers listening in for other things, trying to pick things up. A lot of it is picked up through, as all this technology emerges and makes all these new platforms to use for virtual instruments. There's other platforms arising, right? So we have like fingerprinting and watermarking as well. So a lot of these things come up in fingerprinting detections, right? So you guys have all used Shazam. I'm not going to assume everyone knows about fingerprinting or watermarking. I also don't want to turn this into a lesson about it. But if any of you guys have ever used Shazam on your phone, for example, that's a fingerprinting technology, right? So it's identifying distinctive waveforms. So if you have multiple composers using very similar loops, even like really identifiable percussion loops, as Michael pointed out earlier, it can trigger kind of false positives, right? And so speaking on that, who does this kind of affect other than the composer? Like who's potentially, we're talking about reputation, but we're also talking about potential legal issues. So who does this really kind of affect other than the composer potentially?
Well, it affects the composer the least, really, in a sense, because it affects the music supervisors, the music editors, the producers, the showrunners, the directors. I mean, it goes all the way up the food chain, down the food chain. It goes everywhere. The production music libraries, the non-exclusive libraries, everybody. It affects everybody, and the composers, because everyone can get fired over these things. Everyone can get blacklisted for using these things. That's why everybody has to be very careful, because we as composers are serving all these powers that be, and they're trusting us to give them music that is free and clear and not going to get them into any kind of legal hot water. And it was interesting because I just had a story where I used a sample. It was in 1985 off a keyboard. It was just stock on the keyboard, and this is why we have to be so careful. And a sync agent who's repping the song came to me and said, there is a James Brown sample in this. And I said, "What are you talking about? It's from 1985. Everything I used was just stock on this keyboard." Well, I made friends with the person who does sample clearance, who actually does this type of sample clearance at Warner Chappell, who told me, yes, that is a James Brown sample, and you have to license it or take it out of your track. So I just assumed, of course, back then, well, I bought the keyboard, they gave me all these sounds, of course I can use them, but that is not always the case, as I found out decades later, and as we now have to be so careful about to make sure that we don't assume just because it's there, we can use it free and clear.
So that was a preset, right? That came, it wasn't a
Exactly.
sampling keyboard, it was a preset in the actual
Preset.
keyboard.
Yeah, it was actually a Juno 106, which is one of the first keyboards, actual sampling keyboards.
Mhm.
But it was exactly what you're saying. It was stock set in the keyboard. Just you hit a key and there it was. You know, exactly.
Michèle has a really good point, which is that the technology of 35 years ago was such that detection of something really short like that, like a single note, was not going to happen. So that was the era of everybody used orchestra hits. Well, all of those were illegal. If they were used now, even if you're using a stock sound from the mid 80s, I told everybody a story about how I sampled all these orchestra hits and as a gag and sent it to Emulator, and they sent it to all their users. And the next thing I knew, they were popping up on all these hit records, and I'd be in a session and people would say, "Can you make a sound like that?" And I'd say, "I can make a sound exactly like that." And they were all completely illegal. Now, with all the detection technology, that would be an insane thing to do. And so you have to be really careful with the legacy technology, because we just weren't very careful back in the day. There's some great questions in the chat. Maybe we should take a look at a couple of them. You're driving, Tim.
Let's see. Let me take a look here. Which one
here
do you see, Michael?
Well, one was a simple one.
You're right. There's a lot.
How do I know a
Who
kick
hit
drum or
first?
snare drum? Oh, sorry. Somebody was saying, how can I tell whether my kick drum or my snare drum is okay? I mean, honestly, if you're dealing with an obscure library somewhere, it's probably going to be, you just don't know. If you're dealing with a major library that you've purchased a kick drum sample from, they're legally responsible. So you're actually in, that's pretty safe. There's a spectrum of safeness. Nothing is absolutely safe. You can be sued for, having a counter line in your song that resembles somebody else's counter line, as I believe happened to Lady Gaga. And so, nothing is perfectly safe, but nonetheless, that's a lot more reliable than, say, hey, here's a kick drum I got off a share site on the internet.
Yeah, I think that's often the case too, right? Where some of these sites offer like user uploads, right? So for things like synthesizers or something like that, they'll have user they take the preset and then they'll make something new out of it and they'll upload those, and those are fine because those are just tweaking patches on a synth. But you never know the source of where a sample comes from when people are uploading to the sites, and then people think, well, it's a legitimate site, so it must be okay to use. And sometimes the case is that it's not. Does anyone want to speak to these beats and things of that nature that can kind of get incorporated into compositions?
You broke up, Tim. Can you repeat that again, please?
Michèle?
No, I said, Tim, you broke up. Can you repeat that again?
Having a connectivity. Sorry. Yeah, I was just saying, does anyone want to speak to, like licensed beats or anything like that? It's because we're trying to bring that all in there. So, we're not, I just want to add one last thing. We're not trying to, we're just trying to talk about things that are going to help you reputation-wise and legally as well. I want to keep you in the clear, because you definitely want to take, every opportunity you can to make a good situation for yourself when you're doing this, right? So we're not talking about creative choices necessarily, or certain types of music. We're simply talking about doing it in a proper way for our part of the industry, right? Our corner of the industry. So Michèle, for example, do you want to speak on licensed beats or anything like that? What have you seen with
Sure.
that?
Yes, of course. So that's the key, exactly what Tim is discussing, is the end user license, or EULA, or just simply the license, the contract. It is imperative that we read all of our contracts and licenses with all these companies. We've decided not to mention specific companies, but every company actually has a different license with different ramifications in their licenses. And it's very important to read each one carefully, or have a lawyer, as was mentioned, look at this for you before you use these licenses. Some of them don't allow, as Tim was discussing earlier on, for an isolated stem. So that means that if you're using a bass loop, right, you would have to manipulate that so it doesn't sound the same, so audio detection like Shazam can't recognize it, or you would have to slap it with another sound to change it so that it can't be recognized, because the licenses require that you do not isolate the sounds. So this is very difficult, because in this world where we're asked to deliver stems, right, individual tracks for our productions for the use in sync, right, and for production music, this is scary, because if the music supervisor goes, no, I don't want that bass sound, I actually want the sound that I hear in my head, that's this, but that is the sample that you cannot supply without messing with it, changing it, you're in big deep water, because now you're upsetting the music department and the producers, because that's what they want exactly, and you can't use it because the license tells you you shouldn't, you're not allowed to use it. The same with vocal packs, and a lot of things are non-exclusive. In other words, you're leasing a beat that expires in a few years. Well, you can't sync something in perpetuity if the portion of the track is going to fall out of its license. So it's imperative to read these things. Knowledge is power. And again, since each one is different, that's why you have to read them all. You can't assume because one allows something, the other allows something. Some of them don't allow you to use the name and likeness of the person creating, let's say, the vocals. And that is very difficult, because when you turn in a piece of music for production, for sync, always is asked, who is the artist? They may not be asking who is the guitar player, but they need to know, want to know, demand to know who is the artist. And if you are not allowed to disclose who the artist is, this is not good. This is not optimum. I even know a music producer who will go nameless, who does not disclose the names of the artists who he hires to sing on your productions. Well, you cannot work with that producer, because you cannot use that music if you cannot disclose who the artist is, and also be afraid that someday that artist is going to come out of the woodwork and go, hey, I just heard my song on some major TV show, and I don't have any paperwork and that says that can be used. Well, we didn't disclose their name, but they disclosed their name now, and they're coming after us. So this is why we have to be so careful with those samples hacks.
Well,
what
and
we use.
Michèle, you just hit on something else, which is Carolyn Moore had a question in the on the side in which she said, I'm nervous about using heaviosity vocalese. I've layered my own voice with it in case someone else used vocalese in the way I did. And that is a point with, if you're gonna make a stem using a standard recognizable sample like that stuff, you really need to disguise it as much as possible. And I mean, nobody really knows what is safe with something like that has a kind of a compositional. Now, we're not talking about a pad, a vocal. You hit an A and it's A. I'm talking about something where it's a lick, yeah, some sort of. And if you do that and it is a machine recognizes that as being the Heaviosity or any other library's sample, then yeah, you could be, even if it gets sorted out, it's such a pain in the butt to
I
deal
think
with.
the important thing the important point I think to make is that there's two completely separate things going on, which is what the license agreements say, and then there is what is actually completely safe or even a good idea or a bad idea, even if the license agreement gives you the permission. Now, even if the license agreement gives you the permission, there are still kind of two problems within that. One is that they might not have properly cleared their own material, or there might be some dispute going on in the background between this the people who are putting these samples out there and the sample libraries who they've taken their stuff from. I've definitely heard that that's gone on and not been resolved. So you might be getting into other people's legal problems. So there's the problem that the cleared the cleared things might not be completely safe legally, and the other problem is that the cleared things might be completely safe to use legally, but they also create these tune recognition problems, reputation problems, disputes, and admin trouble. And so this is why us as a company are trying to avoid, in the wording, just to avoid recognizable, unmanipulated, clear phrases. And because that just avoids all of the problems. And the challenge is if it is completely clear and you're completely confident, then you might be able to manipulate it, change it, put it in the background, and that should be fine. There shouldn't be a problem. You can never be 100% sure that there isn't some other thing going on somewhere, but that's going to be fairly safe territory. So yeah, that's me just covering the whole range of possibilities.
Yeah, so just to bank on and add to that, Dan, exactly. If you're using some kind of a loop, especially a drum loop, you need to chop it up, put it back together, tune it, change the tuning, change the pitch on the snare drums. You really need to futz with these things to make them your own and get them out of the land of recognizability, as Dan was saying. So that's ways to do it as well. You can use a bass loop and also change the key, and then, chop it and change where the beats hit. And that's a better way to use these samples. But I would have to just chime in and say, I don't use them because I don't want to be in this position. So I do the old fashioned way. There's a little thing called a drummer and a drum programmer, and he can use his machine or his real drum kit to make your samples and beats for you directly. You can hire singers. There are singers. You can sing them yourself and manipulate the sounds if you can sing. I really advocate for that, and to use these types of loops and samples. Like Michael was saying, if it's a library that has sounds that are licensable, that's different. The sound, yes, we can use those, that's okay. But if we're using loops of lines, like a trumpet line or a bass line or anything like that, or a drum loop, I humbly really am afraid of them and avoid them. So that might not be popular, but that's just my take.
That leads me to a question for the group. I mean, let's say I'm a hip hop producer, and I love hip hop music, and hip hop is total postmodern art form, which is about layering different samples, beats, phrases in a wholly original way to yield a brand new piece of music. And I guess my question is why not use Big Fish Audio or other loop-based sample libraries where you have the right to use it in any way you want, as long as you are creating something wholly original. And then on top of that, let's say, because we're talking about production music here, let's say I deliver it and I deliver stems, but I don't have any individual loops in any of those stems. Like if it's a percussion stem, it's a beat with a couple beats over it. So no single loop that I licensed from a library that I bought, because when we buy it, we have the license. What's wrong with that?
Well, you have to read the license. I've never read that particular license, but I will now because that's got me interested. You have to read the license and make sure it's allowed. And also you have to be careful because again, the music supervisor, whoever's using that piece might hear it and want to isolate something out of it. They might not want your mix in your stem. They might want to just isolate the bass part. And then we come into little bits of problems. So, and also, in hip hop, there are hip hop artists who create their own sounds. And if you go back to even someone like Michael Jackson, I have a friend who developed all the sounds for the keyboards that Michael used. He didn't use any stock anything. He actually had a human who created and manipulated all the sounds he used, calling it sound design. And there are people who do that. So that is also used in hip hop. It's, not all hip hop has stock sounds layered on top of each other. It can be very manipulated. So I'd say, Andrew, like if you're manipulating it, that's way cool, but we have to make sure we can really isolate these single lines because that is often what's asked for, so that's all.
Yeah, and I think, so Edwina Travis Chin added something in the chat that I thought was super hyper valuable. And she had mentioned that the EULA doesn't always allow you to use your derivative work for commercial use, right? The end user license agreement. So be sure to carefully read any agreements that include, especially like Creative Commons licenses. And there are various types and some do not allow commercial use. Others require that if you are getting to use the sample content for free, that your derivative work must also be distributed for free, right? So that was a great point. Thank you for that, Edwina.
Yeah, that was great because exactly that's why we have to read every little license because you never know if one doesn't allow commercial use at all. And I have seen those in some of the licenses. Exactly, Andrew. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to add to that is we're talking about kind of two different commercial spheres here, right? So we're talking about songs that get put out. It's obviously an art form where people will use audio as kind of like a painter will use paint. It's a raw material to build something out of. So we're not talking about creative things like that, but we're talking about when those happen and recordings are made, those get cleared and those get permissions and people get their credited and publishers get credited and that's all worked out in advance and it's going out to radio and Spotify and what have you. With the production music world, we're talking about multiple uses across the spectrum. It's not one individual artist who's really utilizing something to create a cool new art form or a cool new track, but we're talking about multiple uses by multiple different artists using the same kind of things. So what kind of problems, that can trigger things for, like Michèle mentioned earlier, not just a composer and maybe the composer the least, but it affects also PROs, right? Because sometimes they have to go and track things, if there's copyright claims put in by multiple publishers. And also it's difficult for publishers, I would imagine as well, should that come up.
Yeah, exactly. It affects everybody in the whole chain. That one little sample that causes an enormous problem. So that's why we have to be so careful.
I've just been reading some of the questions there, and there's a common question about, well, what do the sample libraries think about this? And I just want to say that I've got a sample library company called Gothic Instruments, and we do the Drona Master Edition. Go and get it now. And so I've written end user license agreements, and I'm in groups where I talk to people who produce this software. And what the sample, speaking as a sort of a sample library owner, what you mainly want is you want to avoid some kind of competitor taking what you've done and just releasing it as it is, or slightly changing it and releasing it as some kind of rival sample library product. When it comes to use on stems, there's two main things. First of all, you don't want people to be doing that as an excuse to just release it as a kind of a sample library product. But you also, there's just a slight legal problem that if they release just your exact sound on a stem, then it's not a derivative work anymore. Possibly, it's possibly just their sample and not something new. So speaking as a sample library on it and having spoken to them, what you actually want is don't release it on a rival product. Use it in a composition with music, And if you're going to put it on a stem, do something to it, change it, add something to it, layer it. Don't just, you can't put it out as it is because it's not yours if you do that. So the sample libraries, usually the most mainstream sample libraries, they don't want to be heavy-handed and start going, oh, I don't like you using this and that. And so they generally want to encourage people to use it. So from a sample library point of view, they're more likely to encourage you to use things more than publishers are, who are more sensitive to things like people recognizing the same thing, tune recognition software kicking in. So there could be a difference of advice that you would get by talking to the two people. So I would say as a publisher, yeah, you legally might be allowed to use some of these things, but I really would rather you didn't because it causes hassle for everybody. So can you not at least do some things like make it less recognizable?
And
sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Just to drill down on what Dan just said, it's a great point. Composers understand when you deliver stems, many of the libraries that you deliver those stems to register those stems with BMI, with ASCAP as a separate work. If that stem has just a beat or a sample that you licensed, you may be in violation of your end user license agreement by doing so when you delivered it. So that's why.
Yeah, and I just want to tag on, that was, Dan, such a great question you came across, because I, from my humble, will say that the sample libraries, what do they want you to do? They want you to use the samples, but they're really coming at it from a place of not synchronization. They're coming at it as a place of helping you, the amateur creator, not you, the professional creator. They're really tailoring to non-professionals to help them make a beat because they don't know how to do it themselves, help them make some kind of musical piece, like on, where you're just slapping on in the key of C, the bass line, the guitar part. They're really catering not to us. So since we are professionals in this room and aspiring professionals, this is why we have to be so careful, because of course the sample libraries want to tell us to use them, but their user licenses are very clear and specific when you cannot use these things for commercial use. And there are many people, like as I mentioned a while back, who are leasing beats. And one might think, oh, how cool, it's so cheap, I can lease this beat for $30. Well, yeah, the person who's leasing you the beat is leasing it to you, and their contract will say so that you can perform it live, so that you can even release it on your album into the DSPs. But it is not allowing for audio-visual use. And that's why we have to be so careful. And even if it is allowing for audio-visual use, it's impossible if it's non-exclusive and leased for a short period of time. Also, if you use some of those lease beats, the contracts that I've read say that the person who created those beats has the right to say, give Dan an exclusive on them. So now I have used the beats in my songs, but now Dan wants to get an exclusive on them. So okay, Dan wants to pay thousands of dollars for an exclusive. I paid $30 to lease it for a minute. They're going to say, sorry, Charlie, you have to take that out of your piece of music. Well, that piece of music is now on a major TV show. So that is not possible. And that's why we have to be so careful, but why the loop maker, right, the library or the loop and beat maker wants me to use it, because they're making money from it. They're just using it as a way for their own gain. They're not necessarily trying to hurt us, but they don't care because they're not coming at it as we are professionals.
Well, yeah, Michèle, sorry, go on.
Could I jump in? I saw something from Allison Plant here in the comments that I think is worth addressing, which is, she says, well, I recognize familiar loops on things that are licensed things from major libraries, and I think that's definitely true. It underscores something on it. This is sort of an editorial statement. I always change everything because I always feel like, partly this is because, why am I a musician? I wanted to do something that is uniquely mine, good or bad. And I really, Howard Scarr, who's a fabulous synth programmer and does a lot of work for Hans Zimmer. And he's particularly tied in with the Zebra synth and comes up with wonderful sounds, but he also has these sequences, these arpeggiator sequences that are included with the library. I will never use them without changing them, because I feel like, okay, so I can hit middle C and sound just like Hans did in, you know, whatever movie it was. Well, that's, it kind of, to be blunt, it kind of offends me as an artist, and going beyond all of the legal issues. So I really urge people to treat these, even a loop, especially audio loops. It's very easy to, as Michèle pointed out, you know, take it and, you know, move beat 3 to move beat 2, you know, run it backwards, whatever. You can do something and use them as raw material.
Oh, you muted there, Michael, at the end.
Well, I was done.
Oh, okay.
I was going to jump on what you were saying, Michael. I think the only way that I use these stems and phrases anymore as reference tracks to emulate, to inspire, and as a starting point where you are creating your own thing. Maybe the vibe has inspired you, but you're not using the actual sounds, beats, patterns. Exactly, your artist brain kicks in at that point. It does increase your production time, which I know that's part of the reason that these are so attractive. It's so, they sound great, they're inspiring, they're cool, and you can do it really fast, but it's worth the extra effort. I think as musicians, we can be really scrappy. I love what Michèle said about using a real drummer. But I don't always have the funds to pay a real drummer, but I can sing. So I can swap vocals or vocalise, or I don't play guitar, but I can, you know, play keyboards. So there are ways that we can work together to still create authentic sounding tracks, as long as you have a work for hire in place.
Great. Yeah, and to speak to Allison's comment, to piggyback on what Michael had brought up, one of the things she mentioned is about, let's see, she said, there are definitely professional libraries used by a lot of media composers, which include recognizable loops / licks. I hear them all the time on TV. Well, that's kind of the problem, right? And we're not anti-technology, we're not anti-virtual instrument publishers and companies. What we are about is trying to advise, right, and put it out there to be aware of some of these things that can happen, because, you know, there may be great intentions, right, for a company to produce some things for a specific need, but it gets picked up for use in maybe the production music sphere, and it doesn't maybe quite work as well as we would like it to in that sphere, right? It might work great for commercial recordings, etc., but not necessarily for production. And I do like the point that Angela brought up, that you can use it as raw material for inspiration, because when we hear things as composers, right, it's like, oh, it gets you fired up. When I hear a great score, I'm like, oh, that's amazing. And so you can use it as raw material to kind of, you know, maybe do something new and fresh with it, or build upon that on your own.
To change the subject a little bit, Michael Johnson just said, does anyone have a good work for hire agreement? I mean, all you really need is you know, really a paragraph, but does anyone have?
I have a great one. I have a great one. Happy to share it.
Yeah, if you can share it somehow, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I can send it to Morgan and she can send it out to the whole group if she has it, likes it and thinks it's okay and all of that.
Well, I just want to put out there too, and this is a whole other panel topic, which is I don't think I've ever seen two work for hire agreements alike. So
exactly.
Work for hire.
Yeah, the one that I use,
deep topic.
The one that I use has been further adjusted by a major music production library from there. It's their license, their work for hire that they use, and it has some additions to it. So it's you know, I think Morgan could have it looked at quickly and it would be really good.
And we're happy to distribute it, as always. Use it as a template, and we encourage you to have your own lawyer look over the agreement as necessary.
For sure, because all these things can be altered to be personal as well if there are specific things that are necessary, and your lawyer wants you to add that.
Quick question for Morgan before we go. The conversation in the chat is amazing.
It is really
I just want to say that we've been reading it. I love it. It's a great conversation. Morgan, where could we take this conversation? Because after Zoom, it's going to be gone. But if it was, say, on Facebook or where could we continue this conversation in this kind of public way?
Yeah, great question. I think we should convene and then send out a transcript perhaps of the chat with some things redacted, and then provide a link to continue the discussion. And all of us should convene on what is the best method for that. Because there's also a cheat sheet type of resource that we're putting together for all of you that references kind of our recommendations again and advice on what is safe and not safe, and to what extent or level that is. We want to just get it cleared by a couple folks, and I have planned to distribute that to everybody here, of course, and then publicly or through a membership or whatever is best. So a few things that will come after this meeting for sure, and we definitely should continue the conversation.
Absolutely. Well, we're almost out of time here. Is there any kind of last second thoughts before we wrap this up from any of the panel?
Did we want to share our little cheat sheet that we made, or how are we going to distribute that?
I think we will distribute it. I want us to get legal opinion to make sure that we are relaying everything accurately and not giving out any inaccurate information. So we are going to distribute it, and it will be made public, and or through membership for us, and especially at least to everybody who registered for this call. So if you're here, you certainly will get a copy. Just let us get formal approvals on a couple of things, and then we will follow up with an email with all of these resources and stuff in there.
Yeah, I have a final comment, and it relates to what Morgan and Angela was just asking. There was this chart that was drawn up, and we had a lot of discussion about what the right numbers were of degree of risk and so forth. The reality is that no one, even including expert lawyers in this area, really know. It is a changing field. It's very different from when, I was a young session player back in the 80s and Michèle was using a Juno 106. It has changed a lot then, but it's still in motion. And so, what you're getting is the opinions of some people who work a lot, but we might be wrong.
Yeah, and it's very much a sliding scale between completely safe, where you've just done it yourself with your own instrument and a microphone. There's not much chance of you breaking any copyright problems there, unless you're actually under some exclusive agreement with somebody. But, and that ranges right to just outright stealing something, and everything else is just somewhere between. Instrument libraries are going to be safe, and then certain things are going to get less and less safe as you get further in it. But it will vary. You could put out something very unsafe, really, and nobody ever hears about it, and it's never a problem. But but that's what a risk is, I suppose. It's not definitely going to cause trouble, but it might. So that's the problem.
Yeah, so again, I think it behooves us to really read those contracts, really become familiar with what they're discussing, right? Angela and I were talking about that, and it's so, so important. I mean, knowledge is power. If we don't pay attention and we just, sign and just use whatever without paying attention, we could get ourselves into deep trouble. And that's why we're all here, to help serve and help educate everybody to be careful. We need to be careful too, because like Michael was saying, technology is changing every single day. I mean, for 30 years almost, nothing happened. And now in the last 10 years, and now in the last year even, it's every single day there's a new platform and a new possibility and new ways to make music and new sounds and all kinds of things for us to use as tools, but they're not necessarily safe for us to use as professionals. So, for what this whole panel is about, which is sync, which is production music, right? They might be okay for putting out our music on Spotify, but they're not, or performing live, but they're just not okay for us to be syncing. So please, be careful.
Indeed.
I
Well,
wanna-
great. Okay, listen,
Sorry,
Morgan,
I want to read one thing that is just important for you all to A, research if you haven't already, but B, to point out. Alex wrote in the chat, the risk of seeing formal legal action beyond demand letters might be greater in the near future due to the CASE Act being passed. That's not necessarily, that's a good point. And that act essentially makes litigation easier in this community and in this music space. So a good point. I'm not an expert on the CASE Act, but that's absolutely right, and something.
The CASE Act deals more with frivolous lawsuits. So, and most of those frivolous lawsuits are, like we're discussing, copyright infringement, which we often think about as, oh, someone played our song, ripped off our song, but really this all falls into that realm. So it's such a great point, Morgan, right? Because it helps us as creators protect ourselves against copyright infringement, really more against someone from the outside who's saying, hey, I wrote your song. Yeah, I may be the UPS guy, but I wrote that song. But it does fall into these ramifications. And that is such a great point. I really never thought about it that way. So I think we all have to think about it that way. That's really important.
I'd like to bring it back to the example that Dan gave in the very beginning of our conversation, in which case the composer might have been very well within their right to deliver that music and not been in any violation against any end user license agreements. But at the end of the day, it was a bad look for Dan. I mean, claims were made and it may have been okay, but it was a bad look for Dan and it wasted a lot of time and energy.
Yeah, and it could have, you're so right, Andrew, and it could just hypothetically, not Dan, because Dan is upstanding, but blacklist Dan or any of us for any of these uses where now it happens once. All of the powers that be are friends with each other. All the music supervisors chat with each other. All the production music library people chat with each other, and they're going, don't work with so-and-so because I had this problem. We can't trust them. It's very hard to repair our reputations from that.
And they
so
don't have
smart,
time for you to
Andrew.
fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of help conclude with the idea that we're working in a professional space, as Michèle had pointed out earlier. So we want to give us, why wouldn't you want to give yourself every opportunity to shine and do well, right? And so in a lot of these, so we're not anti-technology, we're not anti-companies that produce any of this stuff. We're really pro-composer and working in the most effective and safe way possible to keep doing what we love to do, right? And the idea too, we're creative. So a lot of these instruments, especially even the ones that have the phrases, as Michael had mentioned earlier, there's so much manipulative tools available within these libraries amongst themselves that you can go in there and completely change the nature of one of those loops, right? Just within their own interface. So we're creative, so let's go do that, and live good lives and put out good stuff, But so I just wanted to thank everyone. I think we're wrapping up probably, right, Morgan?
Yeah, we can wrap up here.
So I just want to thank everyone. I do want to thank Morgan, obviously from the Production Music Association, Adam Taylor and the rest of the board, Andrew Gross, who is our board advisor for the Composer Advisory Committee. And it's so wonderful to see so many people here today. It's really an exciting thing. And I hope you guys got something out of it. And we look forward to continuing the conversation, maybe on Facebook or some platform to be determined.
Absolutely. And thank you to all the panelists. Thank you guys all for all of your input and for serving on this wonderful committee. I couldn't be more thankful, and I'm excited for work to come. Again, I will say thank you to all of the attendees that were here with us today. If you found value in this and support and want to support the work that we are doing and support the production music industry in general, please consider joining. And we would welcome you into the community with open arms. So thank you to all of you. Enjoy the rest of your day.